All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today's deep dive is going to take us into some pretty murky waters. We're talking Ukrainian politics, U.S. and Ukraine relations, the whole shebang. And get this, Elon Musk. Yeah, that Elon Musk has something to say about Ukrainian elections. We've also got some, let's just say, interesting statements from President Trump that we need to unpack.
Yeah, it's a lot to disentangle. We're dealing with a bunch of different viewpoints and some pretty high stakes, so buckle up.
Okay, so full disclosure. Our deep dive today is based on a collection of recent news articles, and they all seem to revolve around President Trump and his, let's say, outspoken views on the situation.
Right. He's definitely not one to mince words.
You can say that again. He's publicly criticizing President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, for not holding elections, even going so far as to call him a dictator without elections.
Strong words.
That's putting it mildly.
It seems like Trump's criticism stems from his belief that Zelensky just isn't popular with the Ukrainian people. He keeps bringing up Zelensky's approval rating, saying they're super low, like rock bottom.
And of course, the war is not exactly helping things over there.
Exactly. The whole country's in a state of upheaval. Trump's even claiming that Zelensky's approval rating is something like 4%.
4%? But wait a minute, doesn't Zelensky claim to have like a 57% approval rating? And he's saying holding elections during an active war is, well, impossible and could even hurt the country's unity.
Yeah, that's Zelensky's side of the story. He's saying it's just not feasible to organize a proper election when parts of the country are under attack. Logistically, it'd be a nightmare, and ethically, well, there are a lot of questions there.
Makes sense. And this whole election debate gets even more tangled when you throw in Trump's proposed deal with Ukraine, this massive $500 billion deal.
Oh, yeah, the deal that was supposed to be a game changer.
Right. It involved extracting natural resources, specifically these rare earth metals, which I guess are super valuable.
Yeah, rare earth metals are basically the backbone of all our modern tech. Everything from smartphones to military equipment, they're essential. So whoever controls those resources has a lot of power, both economically and strategically.
So Trump was essentially offering Ukraine a huge economic boost, plus, I'm assuming, some security guarantees, all in exchange for access to these resources.
That was the gist of it, but it's not quite as simple as that. There were reports that the U.S. wanted a 50% ownership stake in these ventures, which obviously raised some eyebrows in Ukraine.
50%? That's a pretty big chunk.
It is. And on top of that, there was talk of deploying U.S. troops to safeguard these operations. So it wasn't just about money, it was also about control, influence, and a potential military presence.
Okay, so this deal had a lot more layers to it than initially met the eye. And of course, it eventually fell apart.
It did. Trump claims it was Kyiv's fault that the deal went south and even hinted at some potential consequences if it's not resurrected. But who knows what those consequences might be.
Right. Always with the cryptic pronouncements.
And then, just to add fuel to the fire, Trump comes out and says that if Biden, his opponent, had been president, the U.S. would be in World War III right now.
Whoa, hold on a second. World War III. That escalated quickly.
He's basically saying that Biden's foreign policy is so weak that it would have inevitably led to a global conflict. And of course, Trump's painting himself as the peacemaker, the one who's holding back the tide of global chaos.
And this ties into his whole thing about Russia and their role in the conflict, right?
Exactly. Trump acknowledges that Russia has a ton of leverage in any negotiations. I mean, they do control a big part of Ukraine right now, so that's not exactly a secret. But he also believes that Russia wants to end the war.
But wouldn't they want to end it on their terms, after they've already gained some ground?
Well, yeah, of course. Trump's saying that Russia has the upper hand in any negotiation, which makes sense.
Okay, so we've got these conflicting views on elections, this controversial economic deal that imploded, and the possibility of peace talks, but with a lot of strings attached. Then, out of nowhere, Elon Musk decides to weigh in.
Yeah, that was a curveball, wasn't it?
Totally.
He basically comes out and says that Zelensky can't claim to represent the will of the people if he's not holding elections and if he doesn't restore press freedoms.
So he's questioning Zelensky's legitimacy.
Basically. He's saying that without a democratic mandate, one that's been confirmed through free and fair elections, Zelensky's authority is shaky at best.
And what's this about press freedoms?
It seems like Musk believes that without a free press, there's no way to know if Zelensky's actually as popular as he claims to be.
So Musk's essentially calling for more transparency?
Yeah, he's saying that if Zelensky's so confident in his support, he should be happy to hold an election and let the people decide. He even throws out this challenge saying if he's so popular, he should be thrilled about the idea of having an election.
Wow, that's pretty direct.
Yeah, Elon doesn't hold back. And, he might not be a politician, but he's definitely got a massive platform and a lot of influence. So when he speaks, people listen.
Right. He's like this tech mogul turned global commentator.
Exactly. And his voice just adds another layer of complexity to this whole tangled mess.
So to sum it up, we've got clashing personalities, countries vying for power, a war that's dragging on, and Elon Musk stirring the pot. It's like a geopolitical soap opera.
It really is. And the crazy thing is, this isn't just some abstract political drama. This stuff has real-world consequences for all of us.
That's what I keep thinking, too. This isn't just happening over there somewhere. It affects us all.
Exactly. These events have the potential to reshape the entire geopolitical landscape. And that impacts everything from global trade to international security. The decisions that leaders like Trump, Putin, and Zelensky make, even the opinions of people like Elon Musk, they all have ripple effects. And those ripples can reach pretty far.
It's kind of daunting when you think about it.
It can be. But that's also why it's so important to stay informed, to understand what's going on and why it matters. Because ultimately, we're all part of this story, whether we like it or not.
So what you're saying is our listeners should do their own deep dives into this issue.
Exactly. Don't just take our word for it, or anyone else's for that matter. There's a ton of information out there. Read different perspectives, challenge your own assumptions, and come to your own conclusions.
That's the beauty of knowledge, right? The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to discover.
Absolutely. And this deep dive into Ukrainian politics and all its global implications, well, it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's a real mess, that's for sure. And speaking of messy, let's dig into this $500 billion deal that Trump was pushing. It wasn't just about the money, We're talking about resources, those rare earth metals that everyone's after these days.
Right, rare earth metals. They're pretty important, aren't they?
Essential, really. You need them for all kinds of technologies, smartphones, military stuff, the whole 9 yards. Whoever controls those resources, well, they've got a lot of leverage.
So Trump saw this deal as a way to, maybe reduce U.S. reliance on China for these metals.
You got it. China's been dominating the rare earth market for years, and that makes the U.S. a little nervous, to say the least.
So it was about competition, trying to secure those resources for U.S. industries, and maybe even, the military.
Exactly. Strategic independence, that's the name of the game. And Trump also tried to spin this as a win-win for both the U.S. and Ukraine. He was saying it would bring tons of investment to Ukraine, boost their economy, help them develop their resources.
On the surface, it sounds pretty good. But there were some issues, right? Something about ownership and maybe even U.S. troops being deployed.
Ah, you're remembering correctly. That's where things got a little tricky. Reports were suggesting that the U.S. wanted a 50% ownership stake in these joint ventures.
Wow, 50%. That's a lot.
It is. And some people in Ukraine weren't too happy about it. They saw it as the U.S. trying to muscle in and take control.
It wasn't just about helping out Ukraine, though.
Well, there's always more to the story, isn't there? And then there was the talk of U.S. troops being sent in.
To protect those investments, I guess.
That's what the official line was. But some people saw it as a way for the U.S. to gain a foothold in the region, establish a military presence right on Russia's doorstep.
Which probably wouldn't have gone over too well with Putin.
You can say that again. So yeah, this deal was a whole lot more complicated than it first appeared. Lots of different interests at play, lots of potential for things to go wrong.
Yeah, they did, obviously. The deal fell apart.
Went up in smoke. Trump blamed Kyiv for it, said they messed things up. He even hinted that there might be some consequences down the line, but he was pretty vague about what those might be.
Typical Trump, leaving everyone guessing.
Yep, that's his style. But speaking of Trump, let's get back to his claim about World War III.
Oh, right, the whole, if Biden had been president, we'd be at war thing.
Exactly. He's been hammering on Biden's foreign policy, saying it's weak, indecisive, all that. His claim is that if Biden had been in charge, the U.S. would have been dragged into a global conflict within a year, maybe even World War III.
That seems like a bit of a stretch, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, global conflicts are incredibly complex. They're not usually caused by one person or one decision.
So it's not as simple as saying Biden would have started World War III.
Not at all. It's just Trump's way of painting himself as the strongman, the one who can keep the world safe.
The hero narrative, right?
Exactly. But when you're dealing with global politics, it's never that simple.
Okay, so Trump's claims about World War III, we should probably take those with a grain of salt.
Definitely. A big one. But while we're talking about global politics, we should probably touch on Russia's stance in all of this.
Right. What about Putin and the whole negotiation thing?
Well, Putin's saying that Russia is open to going back to the negotiating table to try and end the war. He even brought up some talks they had with the US and Saudi Arabia as proof that they're willing to talk.
So maybe there's hope for a peaceful resolution after all.
Maybe, but there's a big caveat here. Russia's in control of a lot of Ukrainian territory right now, and they're not going to give that up easily. They're going to want something in return.
So they're negotiating from a position of power.
Exactly. They have the upper hand, and they know it.
Okay, so even if they are willing to talk, it doesn't mean it'll be easy to reach an agreement.
Not at all. And then there's the question of Ukraine's role in all of this.
Right. They're the ones who are being invaded, after all. Do they even get a say in what happens next?
That's a really important question, and there are different opinions on this. Some people say that Ukraine absolutely has to be involved in any negotiations about its future. They say that any peace agreement that doesn't have Ukraine's full consent is going to be shaky at best.
Makes sense. It's their country, their people, their future that's at stake.
Exactly. But there are also people who say that maybe it's better to have these talks behind closed doors, just the US and Russia, without Ukraine directly involved.
Wait, so they're saying that it might be easier to reach a compromise if Ukraine isn't at the table.
That's the idea. The thinking is that maybe there can be more honest and open discussions if it's not all happening in public.
But that sounds super risky for Ukraine. Like they'd be putting their fate in the hands of two superpowers who might not actually have their best interests at heart.
It's definitely a gamble, and a lot of Ukrainians are understandably hesitant about it.
So it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Pretty much. It's a tough spot to be in. And when you step back and look at this whole situation, it really is like this clash of personalities, this clash of ideologies. You've got Trump, who loves to play the strongman. Then you've got Putin, who's always thinking a few steps ahead. And then Zelensky trying to hold his country together in the middle of all this chaos. It's a lot to process.
It really is. And then you throw in someone like Elon Musk, who's not a politician, but he's suddenly got this huge voice in the global conversation.
That's what's so interesting about this whole thing. The lines are getting blurred between business, technology, and politics. It's like everyone wants a seat at the table.
And everyone's trying to grab the steering wheel.
Exactly. It's a power struggle, plain and simple. And it's happening on a global scale, which means the stakes are incredibly high.
So where does that leave us, the everyday people, trying to make sense of it all?
Well, I think the most important thing we can do is stay informed. Don't just blindly accept what you hear from politicians or the media, even from us. Do your own research, ask questions, and form your own opinions. Because the decisions that these powerful people make, they affect all of us.
So it's not just about being a spectator. We have to be active participants.
Exactly.
Right?
We can't just sit back and watch the world burn. We have to engage, we have to think critically, and we have to make our voices heard, because that's how we make a difference. That's how we create a better future.
It's funny. We talk about all these big global things like wars and mega deals, but then you see someone like Elon Musk, who you usually associate with electric cars and going to Mars, suddenly jumping into this political mess. It just shows how everything's connected these days.
Yeah, it's like the walls between different worlds are breaking down. You can't just separate business from politics anymore, or technology from global affairs. It's all intertwined.
And that makes it even more important to really understand these issues, because they're not just happening over there. They're affecting all of us, even if we don't see it right away.
Right. Like take the whole debate about elections in Ukraine. Should they hold elections now in the middle of a war? It's a tough question.
Yeah, I can see both sides. On one hand, elections are kind of the foundation of democracy, right?
Yeah.
Even in a war, people should have a say in who leads them.
Exactly. It's about legitimacy, making sure the government actually represents the people. But then on the other hand, trying to organize an election in a war zone, that's just crazy.
Logistically, it'd be a nightmare, not to mention the security risks. And how do you even ensure a fair election when there's so much chaos and propaganda flying around?
Exactly. It's not a simple answer. And that's what makes this stuff so interesting. It forces you to really think about what democracy means and how it works, especially in extreme situations.
So it's like there's no easy answer, no clear right or wrong.
Exactly. And that's a good lesson for anyone, really. Don't just accept the easy answers or the narratives that people are pushing. Take the time to understand the different sides, the different complexities.
Think for yourself.
Exactly. Okay, but before we wrap up, we have to go back to Trump's World War III claim.
All right, that was a big one. Essentially saying if his opponent had won, we'd all be in a global war right now.
It's important to remember that this is just Trump's perspective, his way of looking at things, and he loves to paint himself as the hero, the one who saved the day.
Which, let's be honest, is a bit of a stretch. Wars are complicated. They don't just happen because of one person.
Exactly. It's way too simplistic to say that one person could have single-handedly prevented World War III.
Yeah.
But that's kind of Trump's style, isn't it? Simplify things, make it black and white, good versus evil.
And it works for him. But when it comes to these really complex global issues, that kind of thinking can be dangerous because it oversimplifies things and it stops people from seeing the nuances, the gray areas.
And sometimes those gray areas are where the real solutions are. It's all about understanding the complexities, the different perspectives, and being willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Which brings us back to that whole critical thinking thing.
Right. Don't just passively absorb information. Question it, analyze it, and then form your own conclusions.
Be an active participant, not just a spectator.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good takeaway from this whole deep dive. We've thrown a lot of information at you, some of it conflicting, some of it challenging, but hopefully it's made you think a little bit.
And we hope it encourages you to keep exploring these topics, to keep asking questions and seeking out different perspectives. Because the more informed we all are, the better.
Right. The world needs more informed and engaged citizens. So keep learning, keep questioning, keep digging deeper.
Great advice. Well, I think we've covered just about everything we can for today. It's been a wild ride, exploring Ukrainian politics, U.S. and Ukraine relations, those potential deals, and even Elon Musk's surprising role in all of this.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, to say the least, and we hope it sparked your curiosity to learn even more.
Exactly. Don't let this be the end of your exploration. Keep diving deeper, challenge those assumptions, and form your own conclusions. And hey, maybe you'll even discover something that we missed.
That's what it's all about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.